everybody, episode 695 of the podcast that is Swimming America, the Outdoor Sports Podcast presented by Betfred Sportsbook. It is Monday, April 10th, 2023. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody had a great Easter weekend. I'm actually recording here during the final round of the Masters. Figure I'll let somebody else spit out the hot John Rahm takes. And instead, today we're going to focus on college hoops here on the Aaron Torres pod. And let me say this real quick. I know a lot of you are big college football people as well. And I promise you, as we get deeper into the spring, we're going to start to go back to the football well. A lot going on. We had a couple spring games this weekend. Auburn was this weekend. Next weekend is USC. A bunch coming up. But right now, we're going to focus on college basketball because this is actually a fascinating time of year. You know, during the season, Dan Hurley called it we season, W-E. Now it is officially me season as we have a lot of transfer stuff. We got a lot of NBA draft stuff. And that is what today's focus is going to be on the Aaron Torres pod. We're going to start transfer portal, just some commitments. Okay, we've been talking about who's entering, what does it mean, where are they visiting, all that good stuff over the last couple weeks. But today, the focus is on 4 players who committed over the weekend. Big names, big spots, big commitments. We'll start with Caleb Love. He's headed to Michigan. We'll talk a little bit about LJ Cryer, a really good player headed to Houston, Ace Baldwin to Penn State. And we'll wrap. How about this? The big invasion, baby. Tramon Mark from Houston heading now to Arkansas. We'll break that down. Then from there, we'll take a quick break and we will turn our attention to some NBA draft stuff. Oscar Tshiebwe, very interesting, has decided to declare. That's not surprising. But I think the question is, Kentucky fans, do we want him back? Do we not want him back? Do you want him back? Do you not want him back? It's a fascinating thing. You'd think you'd want the National Player of the Year from a year ago back, but it complicates some things. So we're going to break that down. And then the UConn Huskies. Jordan Hawkins declares, but at their national championship parade on Saturday, UConn got some great news as Donovan Clingan, their star freshman center, announces he'll be back for his sophomore year. Busy show, fun show. Again, we will get back to football over the next couple weeks, but today the focus is basketball. And so with that said, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, I just laid it out. I just explained it. It is a fascinating time in college basketball because it's really it's player mobility season, right? Players are entering the portal. Players are visiting. Players are declaring. Players are entering the NBA draft. Players are entering the NBA draft and leaving the option open to come back to college. Players are entering the draft and entering the transfer portal at the same time. It is chaos. It is hysteria. My job is to make it all make sense for you. So let's start with some transfer stuff and more specifically transfer commitments, okay? Because over the last couple of weeks, we've talked a lot about players entering the portal. Who's going where are they going to end up, all that good stuff. Well, now the portal's been open about 2.5, 3 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks as of today. And so because of it, we're now starting to see commitments. Guys make decisions, guys end up in specific places. And so we're going to spend time talking about 2, 3, 4 of these guys. But I would argue that the single biggest player, at least from a name brand recognition, and maybe the single most fascinating commitment of this offseason happened on Friday. It involved Caleb Love. We all know Caleb Love. You don't need me to tell you his story, but a fascinating player, former McDonald's All-American, played at Carolina the last 3 years as a starter. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say hit some of the most iconic shots in college basketball history, but also, as we've discussed a couple times on this show, this past year was an outright disaster for Caleb Love at North Carolina, leading him to enter the transfer portal about 2.5 weeks ago. It was a disaster for North Carolina, preseason number 1 team in the country, but specifically it was a disaster for Caleb Love. This was a guy that came in, I think a lot of people thought, can he play his way into the first round? Was a fringe first rounder last year. Instead, shooting percentage dips to 38%. Not very good for a guard who's trying to create off the dribble and make plays for others. His 3-point percentage drops to 29% this year. And really, let's be honest, I don't know if he was all of the problem at North Carolina, but he was a huge part of their issue. Too many bad shots, early in the shot clock, doesn't get Armando Bacot involved. And so when the season ends and you have a guy that some believed was a preseason All-American, that basically the staff very willingly said, we wish you well, but get the heck out of here. You knew it was going to be chaotic. Anyway, that is a long lead up to say that Caleb Love did make his decision over the course of this weekend. Caleb Love, it seemed like over the last couple days, we talked about it on last Friday's show, it seemed as though it was going to come down to Michigan and his home state school of Missouri. Well, on Friday, Caleb Love officially committed to the University of Michigan. And so, like I said, I don't believe he's the best player in the portal. But when you talk about a player, a school, and a marriage of convenience, I don't think there is a more fascinating commitment that we will see the entire transfer portal cycle than Caleb Love. Let's break down the positive and negative. Because I'm a glasses half full guy, let's focus on the positive. And the positive is this. Caleb Love, listen, say what you want about Caleb Love. This guy can get you buckets, okay? And we've seen when Caleb Love is good and Caleb Love is on, he is one of the most unstoppable guards in college basketball. This was a guy that dropped 28 points in a Final Four game against Duke a few years ago. And we talked about this when he entered the portal. Like, you can criticize Caleb Love for whatever you want, but listen, there aren't very many guys in the portal. As a matter of fact, there was only one that I've ever seen drop 28 points in a Final Four game. It was Caleb Love. And so he had 30 against UCLA in the Sweet 16. So we know what he's capable of. We know that he is a pure bucket getter. And what I would say is, from the Caleb Love perspective, why this could work, this is almost a perfect spot for Caleb Love. And the reason why is pretty simple. Michigan doesn't have anybody to get him points anymore. Have you seen what has happened to this team in the offseason? We've talked about it, but Hunter Dickinson, the leading scorer, entered the transfer portal. Jet Howard, the second leading scorer, Juwan's son, declared for the NBA draft. Kobe Buffkin, third leading scorer, came on, actually played well late in the year, declared for the NBA draft. So right now, the leading returning scorer in the program is a sophomore point guard who's about 5'9", 5'10", named Doug McDaniel, okay? And I like Doug McDaniel. I think he's a good college basketball player, but he's not the kind of guy that is going to go from 8 points per game, which he averaged this year, to like 21 next year. Like, you needed somebody to be able to come in and create offense and provide offense, and Caleb Love is it. And so it's a perfect marriage in some regards, because Michigan very much first of all, they just need bodies, but two, they need high-level guys that can come in and compete at the highest levels of basketball, okay? I understand why different schools recruit different guys for different roles and different this and different that. But again, you could take some dude that averaged 20 points per game in the Missouri Valley or the Big Sky or the SoCon or whatever. You don't know how he's going to translate to the upper levels of college basketball. We know that Caleb Love at his best is a guy that can get you 20 points on any given night at the highest levels of college basketball. And so that's why this works. Again, I used the term marriage of convenience a few minutes ago, and I think it's very applicable to this situation, right? Very applicable to this situation. Marriage of convenience. Michigan needs dudes that can get buckets. Caleb Love can get you buckets. So that's why it could work. Caleb Love with the ball either in his hands, playing off the ball, creating whatever. They need him. He's there. Now we get to see if it works. But, and there's always a but, and I'm trying not to be glasses half empty here. I could also say this. I didn't take chemistry in high school, but I could, you know how you pour the wrong liquid into the wrong beaker and there's an explosion that blows everything up? That could be Caleb Love at Michigan too. And it's interesting, right? I was thinking about this, right? So right now, a big conversation in college sports is NIL. And I think everybody's in favor of NIL, but everybody's also in favor of NIL with guardrails. Nobody likes when other teams are just offering your players more money. Those guys enter the portal and they leave. So everybody kind of agrees, NIL, great. NIL without any guardrails at all, kind of chaotic. Got to get it figured out. Why I bring it up, to bring it back to Caleb Love. Caleb Love is really good. But Caleb Love without any guardrails at all, not totally sure if that's what you want if you're Michigan. And so on the one hand, it could work out well. He could be efficient. He can play with Doug McDaniel. He can play with Namari Burnett, transfer from Alabama. they could be one of the best backcourts in the Big Ten, and they can finish third or fourth in that league, get a 6 seed, and save Juwan Howard's job. Or Caleb Love, knowing that Michigan really has nobody else to go to besides him, he might be even more out of control than he was this year. This was a guy that this season, again, he shot 38% from the field as a guard, 29% from three. Very talented player who was wildly out of control this year. Averaged this season 15 shot attempts per game, 7.5 3-pointers per game. You know, it's like the old John Calipari saying, you don't got to make them all, but you can't miss them all either. And if you're shooting 7.5 3-pointers a game, I'd like to see you make more than 29%. And so that's where this becomes interesting, because it could work out, could be the best thing that ever happened to Caleb Love. Or if he isn't more consistent, if he doesn't have better shot selection, if he doesn't listen to coaches like it seemingly he didn't do at Michigan, this could end up really, really, really bad. And so ultimately, that's my final last thought about this decision. Ultimately, we can't really judge Michigan right now, this second, as a team without seeing what else they do in the transfer portal. But at the same time, what I will say is this. It does feel as though Juwan Howard basically just attached his career as Michigan head coach to Caleb Love. And we talked about this before, but Juwan Howard, obviously, look, 3 years ago, COVID year 2021, leads Michigan to the Elite Eight. But that team had a lot of leftover players from John Beilein's era. Eli Brooks, Isaiah Livers, whoever. I'm trying to think of who am I missing? Franz Wagner was another one. Really good team, Elite Eight, all that good stuff. Problem is everything that's happened since then. Last season, Michigan and Juwan Howard, 19-15, 11-9, sneak into the NCAA tournament, 11-9 in the Big 12, I should say, sneak into the NCAA tournament as a 11 seed. Now, they do make the Sweet 16, got a nice draw, beat Colorado State, beat Tennessee, go to the Sweet 16. But last year, you sneak in as an 11 seed. This year, you make the NIT. You go next year and you don't make the NCAA tournament, I think Juwan Howard's probably out of a job at that point. Like, I don't think that's insane to think about. And so I just bring it up to very simply say, Juwan Howard kind of basically attached his career to Caleb Love. And I don't really know that at this point he had a better choice, right? You lose Hunter Dickinson, you lose Jett Howard, you lose Kobe Buffkin. Don't really know what other choice he had. But I will say it's an interesting kind of thought experiment, right? Could he have gone with 2, 3, 4 kind of mid-major players and hope that they click and hope you have a tournament team? Instead, he kind of pushed all his chips in the middle and said, I know what this guy can be. I just hope I have to be the guy that can get it out of him. And so it'll be fascinating to watch. Again, I don't think we can contextualize what good this makes Michigan. I need to see what else Michigan does. Right now, they got like 6 scholarship players. It's probably a few more. They have a young guy, Terrace Reed, a front court guy. Terrence Williams is a veteran wing guy. Doug McDaniel, like I said, Namari Burnett, who transferred from Alabama. They still need to fill out this roster. They probably still need scoring on the wing. Have a center, but probably need another backup. So there's still a lot of work to be done for the Michigan Wolverines. But right now, like I just said, we can, what do I always say, right? The show is tonight. I can only judge Michigan on what I know right now. And I don't know if they're good. I don't know if they're not good. But what I can tell you, they are absolutely fascinating. All right, let's get to some other news and not news and notes. This isn't a news and notes segment. We'll get to news and notes on Wednesday. Today is the commitment special because we had a bunch of really big commitments over the course of this weekend. So Caleb Love was on Friday. Sunday, we had not one, I sound like LeBron James, not 2, but 3 big-time commitments that I want to discuss. The first one, outside of Caleb Love, who committed on Friday, I do want to focus my attention on LJ Cryer. Now, a few days ago, last Thursday on Aaron Torres Online, I did my top players in the transfer portal right now. LJ Cryer was in the top 5 of those players, okay? Right now, I still think Hunter Dickinson's probably the best player in the portal. Ryan Nembhard from Creighton is really good. Max Haysmith. But at number 5, I did have LJ Cryer, who was the second leading scorer for a really good Baylor team this year. And so I bring it up because LJ Cryer, 15 points per game for Baylor, a team that ended up as a 3 seed. He entered the portal a few weeks ago, and on Sunday, he committed to the University of Houston. And so let me just jump in and talk a little bit about LJ Cryer. I think he's a fascinating prospect, and I think this is a fascinating fit for a few reasons. One, this guy is just a stone-cold bucket getter at the college level, okay? 15 points per game this past year, 42% three-point shooting. Now, some other guys enter the portal, but I think you can argue this is probably one of the best pure scorers that we have in the portal this offseason, okay? And again, part of it comes back to what I just said. We can take a guy from the mid-major level. How will it translate? I don't need to wonder if this guy can get buckets at a big-time level. 15 points per game, 42% three-point shooting. Now, the thing about LJ Cryer that is interesting, and it is worth noting, one, he's not a super, super big guy. 6'1", 185 or so pounds. He's really got kind of the body of a lead guard, of a point guard, but he actually plays better off the ball. And so what's interesting is a few things. Is one, I do think when he entered the portal, part of why he was leaving Baylor, he wanted to prove to people, I can be a lead guard. I can handle the ball. I can do that. Kind of takes away from what he does well. But on the other hand, what's interesting is this. I do think when you're going to take him on your team, you probably need to pair him with a bigger guard because there's going to be some matchup problems for you defensively. And so I could go on and on, but the point I'm trying to make, this commitment is good. But on Saturday, Houston also got another commitment from a kid named Damian Dunn, a 6'4" guard who played the last couple of years at Temple. And so the combination of Damian Dunn with LJ Cryer, I love this commitment for that reason. LJ Cryer is a little bit smaller. LJ Cryer, if he's playing as the 2, there's some defensive problems, but now he's the 1, and he's a guy that can, again, get you buckets, and he's not going to get killed defensively because of his size. Lastly, what I would say, and this to me is the interesting part of the LJ Cryer commitment, is that remember, this is the first transfer portal cycle that Houston is recruiting a team to compete in the Big 12. And it's easy to forget that right now, this second, this moment in time. But at the same time, Houston, along with Cincinnati, BYU, and Central Florida, all go to the Big 12 this coming fall. And we'll talk about it from the football perspective. What does it mean? But from the basketball perspective, Houston has been really good, but they went like 30-3 or something this season. They ain't going to be able to do that in the Big 12, or at least they need to upgrade the talent. And so this is important to me. LJ Cryer is from the city of Houston. He's returning home, but he's a guy that's a proven commodity in the Big 12. Again, 15-point per game score in the Big 12. These are the kind of players that you need at Houston. And I'm not here to tell Kelvin Sampson how to run his program. They've been one of the best programs in college basketball over the last 5 or 6 years. But it's going to be a step up in competition. You're going to go from playing at East Carolina and at Tulane to playing at Kansas State, Texas Tech at home, Texas at home, whatever. So credit to Houston. They needed this guy. They got this guy. I think Houston's really interesting. Finally, what I would say about Houston is, they were a team. I had them about number 20 in my way too early top 25. Well, you add Damian Dunn, you add LJ Cryer with the players that they have coming back, Jamal Shead, Terrence Arsenault. I do have Houston. They'll probably be about a top 12-ish, maybe even higher team with this roster that they're putting together. Lastly, would be remiss if not lastly, I got 2 more, but I do want to mention very quickly, I don't know that there's a ton to break down here. There was a big piece of news. Ace Baldwin, who was the Atlantic 10 Player of the Year, played the last 3 years at VCU. This one is interesting because he followed, remember, VCU's head coach, Mike Rhodes, he goes to Penn State. Penn State's head coach, Micah Shrewsbury, left for Notre Dame. Well, Mike Rhodes, Penn State, goes to Penn State. and Penn State gets a commitment from VCU's best player, Ace Baldwin. And I'll just say this, Ace Baldwin's a really good college basketball player. I don't care if it was the A10. He's going to be one of the better guards in the Big 10 next season. About 6 foot. He's a little bit small, but super quick, pushes tempo. Really good defensive guard too. I think that's what stands out, about 2.5 steals per game. I'll just tell you, like, I'm not trying to be cliche or whatever. The Big Ten doesn't have a lot of guards like him. And I think he's a guy that can step in from day one. And it'll be very interesting to see how that Penn State style plays in the new Big Ten, right? Because the VCU style, fast-paced, defense, 94 feet of pressure, they're bringing that to the Big Ten. Ace Baldwin is headed to Penn State. And then, finally, one last piece of transfer portal news. I bring it up to say that in the last couple hours, we did have a major commitment from one of the best players currently in the portal. I am, of course, talking about Tramon Mark. Spent the last 3 seasons as a member of the Houston Cougars. You know, I love me those Cougars, baby. Love me those Cougars. But Tramon Mark, last 3 seasons at Houston, part of a Final Four team in 21, part of an Elite Eight team in 2022, even though he dealt with some injuries. And this past year was a big part of Houston's Sweet 16 team, which earned a number 1 seed. Well, he entered the portal, also sort of entered the draft, but I don't think he's going to stay. But as I said, within the last couple hours, he did make his college announcement in terms of his transfer portal decision. And drum roll, please. Tramon Mark is headed to the Arkansas Razorbacks. Eric Musselman does it again. And I just got one question for you. Can anybody stop the Big Pig invasion? Link to t-shirts in the show bio below. But let's get into Tramon Mark, because I'll tell you this. I think he's just a really, really, really good college basketball player, right? He is a kid that, as I said, when he left Houston, decided to both enter the portal and enter the NBA draft. I can't speak to his NBA future, at least at this moment in time. But what I can say is exactly what I just said, a very good college basketball player. Big guard, about 6'5". He is a lefty. Not a great shooter, but a very good scorer. Averaged 10 points per game over the last couple years. Keep in mind, Houston is not a place that scores. They had a good offense this year, but they're not getting up and down this and that. But 10 points per game, about 5 rebounds per game, a little over a steal and a half per game. And so you look at this guy, I just think he's kind of a very good new age wing player in college basketball. Not elite, not a great 3-point shooter, but he's super long, super athletic, can create for himself off the dribble, can create for others off the dribble. And oh, by the way, and I think this is an important part specifically for where he committed. He is a really good defender, a very active defender, a very willing defender. And the one thing that I truly believe, and we've talked about this with other commitments, specifically Keon Menafield, the first player as a transfer to commit to Arkansas this year. If you are not a willing defender, if you are not an able defender, if you're just not willing to leave it on the line on both ends of the floor, everybody wants to get buckets. If you're not willing to defend, you cannot get on the floor for Eric Musselman. And so this is why I love the commitment so much, because sometimes, you get caught up in a big brand like Arkansas. They've had tournament success. Everybody wants to go there, all that good stuff. But I just think it is a perfect match between player, style of play, how the guy plays, how the team plays. I think it is going to be really, really, really good. And I think that a lot of those championship type habits that were created at Houston, Tramon Mark is going to bring with him. That's one thing that I've really, picked up just talking to coaches over the last couple of years, is that there is something to coming from a program that has had winning success. I remember talking to a high major coach about this last offseason, and he said, even when I recruit low major, mid-major guys, I love to have them coming from winning programs. They know the work ethic. They know the time that has to be put in, the commitment, the off the court stuff, the weight training, the sleep, the food, the diet, all of that. That's what you get at a championship caliber level. And that's certainly what you get coming from Houston to Arkansas. So Tramon Mark, a veteran 4th-year college player, is going to bring that. And I'll be honest, I really like how this Arkansas team is starting to come together. Now, it's very early in the offseason, so there's a ton of moving parts, not only in Arkansas, but everywhere. But I bring it up because you look at this team, I'm telling you, I really like the pieces that are coming together. One, as I mentioned, Tramon Mark is the second transfer for Arkansas. They did receive a commitment from Keon Menafield over the last couple days, a player who just finished his freshman year at Washington, was an all Pac-12 guard, average double figures, 33% three-point shooter. But what I love about Keon Menafield, he's a little bit smaller, more of an on-the-ball kind of guard. He can play off the ball too. But what I love about Keon Menafield is he's the same as Tramon Mark, gets after it defensively. And when I start to think about Keon Menafield with Tramon Mark on the court together, that is already, right now this second, one of the best defensive backcourts in college basketball. And that's not even factoring in that Devo Davis, while he's testing the NBA draft waters, I think most of us expect him to return. I have no reason to believe that he won't. So you're talking about at minimum 2, maybe 3 elite wing and guard defenders. You add in, oh, by the way, Trevin Brazil, who I think could be a preseason All-American at Arkansas. Remember, he's averaging 12.6 rebounds per game, about 2 blocks per game this year on a loaded experience, just a really good Arkansas team early when they were fully healthy. He goes down with that knee injury. Well, now he's coming back. So you have him down low. You have Jalen Graham down low. You have Jalen Graham, the returnee, was an all Pac-12 guy 2 years ago at Arizona State. As I said, I think Devo Davis will probably be back. I think Joseph Pinion will be back. And then, oh, by the way, you also got a McDonald's All-American in Bay Falls, 6'11", super athletic, and a guard named Layden Blocker, another guy who gets after it on both ends of the court. So there's still a lot of moving parts. We'll see what happens with Devo Davis. I know one of the Mitchell twins already hit the portal. I think the assumption is both eventually will. And there's other moving parts too, whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is that the group that Arkansas is going to have right now, we know they have 5-6 players: Menafield, Tramon Mark, who I'm talking about here, Trevin Brazil, Jalen Graham, Joseph Pinion, and the 2 freshmen. That is a really, really, really good place to start. And I'm telling you, this Arkansas team is going to be once again very dangerous going into next year. And I'll tell you, I think it's a little too early to get too crazy about way too early top 25 stuff. As far as all that's concerned, I already had Arkansas in the top 10. And listen, we'll see what everybody else does. Duke's got to make their moves, Kansas, Kentucky, whoever. But I'm telling you, this Arkansas team under Eric Musselman, it will be a team that, once again, will be good enough to get to a second weekend and maybe get to the school's first Final Four since 1995. We'll get back to the show in a minute, but before we do, I want to welcome back our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. It is March. You want to make wagers, and there is no better place to make them than at the Betfred Sportsbook, the presenting sponsor of the Aaron Torres pod and all things Aaron Torres Media. By now, you know Betfred's story. Started in 1967 in the UK, over 1,600 shops in the UK, and they have come to the United States and made a major splash. They are the presenting sponsor of the Colorado Rockies, Denver Broncos, Cincinnati Bengals, Aaron Torres Media. And what I love about Betfred, they do more for their customers than anybody. And here's what they're doing for you this March. You can bet $50 on any game this March, any game, and they will give you up to $1,111 in free bets. Here's how it works. Download the Betfred Sportsbook app, go to betfredsports.com, make your first $50 wager. You automatically get $111 in free bets. But then, how about this? For the first 5 weeks that you are a Betfred customer, you will be insured for up to $200 for the first 5 weeks. So you make a few bets, and we're all going to win all our bets this March. But if it doesn't work out, they'll give you up to $200 back for the first 5 weeks that you're a Betfred customer. So download the Betfred Sportsbook app, bet $50 on any game, $111 in free bets, plus up to $200 in free bets in insurance the first 5 weeks. That is all you got to do. Betfred Sportsbook, Betfred Sportsbook app. Tell them Torres sent you. Enjoy March, everybody. All right, everybody. Hi, back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears, and I want to look at the other side of me season. We just did we season. UConn wins the national championship. Now it's time for me season, as everybody's trying to figure out stay or go, test the NBA draft waters, transfer, whatever. So we obviously just talked a lot about the transfer portal, all these kids that committed. But what I want to do now is I do want to switch gears, and I want to talk a little bit about the NBA draft stay or go decisions. It's funny, right? Like literally as of like 2 years ago, this is all we talked about in April from the college basketball perspective, stay or go. Now it feels like it's taken a backseat to the transfer portal. But over the weekend, there were some significant stay or go NBA draft decisions that I want to get into right now. The one that I think is probably the most interesting, it actually does come from the University of Kentucky, where on Friday, I don't know if it was a Friday news dump, I don't really know, but Oscar Tshiebwe, who of course 2 years ago was the National Player of the Year, consensus National Player of the Year, came back, was really, really good again this season, even though he didn't quite put up the stats that he did a year ago, announced that he is going to test the NBA draft waters, although he is not officially leaving school for good. And so why that's interesting is because of the very simple math and calculus that comes with that decision. One, in theory, he could return for another year of college basketball if he so chooses. What becomes interesting, though, is this. As crazy as it sounds, I think the Kentucky fan base is actually pretty divided on whether they want Oscar Tshiebwe to come back. And so what I want to do is discuss the positive of Oscar Tshiebwe potentially coming back, what the potential negative is, and then I do want to talk about what's behind door number 3. Because while I don't think it's going to happen, I think there's at least a small possibility in the NIL world, if he doesn't feel like there's a spot for him at Kentucky, could he come back to college basketball and enter the transfer portal? Don't think it's going to happen. But in this world that we live in, I don't think anything is out of the realm of possibility. So let's get into it. And before we even get into it, let me start by saying this. I think if Oscar Tshiebwe has his druthers, he's done 4 years of college basketball, played at his dream school, the University of Kentucky. And I think he is entering the NBA draft with the intention to stay in the NBA draft. A little bit older, 22, 23, 20, I think he might even be 24, and might just be ready to get on with his life. But we all know the reason he was even back at Kentucky this year is because he doesn't make a great NBA draft prospect. And so because of it, again, let's talk a little bit about the positive and negative of Oscar Tshiebwe coming back potentially to Kentucky. The positive, and I think a lot of Kentucky's fan base feels this way, is you're getting back the reigning National Player of the Year and one of the most iconic players in the history of your college basketball program, the history of the University of Kentucky. And so the positive of getting Oscar Tshiebwe back is you get back one of the best big guys in college basketball. It's wild because this year was deemed as a little bit of a quote-unquote step back year for Oscar Tshiebwe. He quote-unquote only averaged 16.5 points per game and a little under 14 rebounds per game. But that is in comparison to what he did as I guess it would have been a true junior 2 seasons ago in the 2021-2022 season, where he averaged 17 points, 15 rebounds per game, and was again the consensus National Player of the Year. And so obviously there is a big chunk of the Kentucky fan base that is like, bring that guy back. He is 17 and 15 guaranteed. By the way, the thing that's crazy about him having a quote unquote, and if you're watching on YouTube, I am doing the air quotes, the quote unquote down year. The crazy part about it is this. He did that coming into a season where he had surgery like a month before the season. It's easy to forget this now. This is why like everyone wants to crush Calipari or whatever. It's like, dude, you had the National Player of the Year, had surgery before the season, and basically got thrown into the fire game 1 against Michigan State on opening night at the Champions Classic. And so I just bring it up to say, like, what Oscar Tshiebwe did, 16.5 points, 14 rebounds this season, and he basically had no preseason. Just had surgery, came back game 1 against Michigan State, and got thrown into the fire. And so obviously, again, I think there's a big percentage of the Kentucky fan base that is like, give me that guy back, especially with a group of really young freshmen. I think everybody knows, but Kentucky has the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the country, 4 top 10 players in that class, DJ Wagner and Rob Dillingham at guard, Justin Edwards on the wing, Aaron Bradshaw, a 7-footer down low, Reed Shepard, also a McDonald's All-American, is in that mix as well. So you have 5 freshmen. I think Antonio Reeves is going to come back. And you throw Oscar in and you have the veteran kind of enforcer in the locker room that's not going to let things slip. And I do think there is something to that, right? I think it's easy to sit there and say we have this great recruiting class coming in, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, you do want the vets to kind of lay out the pathway, to kind of explain this is who we are and this is how we do things. Now, Lance Ware is probably going to be back. Adu Thiero is probably going to be back. Some of these role players, but you have that star back that sets the tone for the locker room. I don't think it's the worst thing. At the same time, behind door number 2, I think there's also a pretty big part of the Kentucky fan base that says, look, we will forever be grateful for Oscar Tshiebwe. Remember, he came in after that disastrous COVID season and really just, I think, re-energized that fan base. It was a tough 2020-2021 season. And then Oscar comes in, wins consensus National Player of the Year. And so I bring it up because I think that there's a huge part of the fan base that's like, I'll forever love that guy. One of my favorite Wildcats of all time. But at the same time, it is time for him to move on. Because on the one hand, you do have the freshman class coming in. And you do want those guys to kind of grow and mature at their own rate with the hopes that by the end of the year, they are playing like lottery picks and Kentucky can roll out the most talented roster in college basketball next year. DJ Wagner is going to be a lottery pick. Justin Edwards is going to be a lottery pick. Aaron Bradshaw is probably going to be a lottery pick. And so you would love to have Oscar back with them, but there's also the counter, which is like, darn, is he going to slow down their development? Are we going to rely too much on him? Because when you have Oscar Tshiebwe, what ends up happening is he's kind of got to be the focal point of everything you do, right? You run the offense through him. He's probably, I know he played a small ball kind of center with Jacob Toppin at the 4 this year, but I bring it up because everything kind of does have to revolve around him. And let's also be honest about Oscar Tshiebwe. As great as he was, as awesome as he was, as incredible as he's been the last 2 years, he does have some real deficiencies. And those deficiencies are obvious, right? Because if he was that good, that talented, that unbelievable, he would have been in the NBA already. Like, the college money is good, but the NBA money is better. And so the fact that he's back for even this year shows that as good as he is, he's not a great NBA draft prospect. And so because of it, we saw it this year where, as great as he is, he had those incredible nights, 30 points, 20 boards, whatever it would be. There were also nights where he got completely played off the floor. Like, you can criticize Nate Oates for whatever you want, how he handled certain things this year. I thought it was a coaching masterclass when they played Kentucky, and literally Oscar Tshiebwe he couldn't be on the floor. They just abused him defensively. Not a great athlete on the perimeter, a little bit slow defensively, and Alabama just kept going at him, kept going at him, kept going at him, kept going at him. And all of a sudden you look up and you're like, boy, oh boy, like, they got to put Oscar on the bench. He can't handle what Alabama is doing. And so I just bring it up to very simply say, there's the positive of Oscar Tshiebwe, but there's the negative. And I do wonder if Kentucky fans are like, you know what? We love him, but it's time to move on. Let the freshmen develop at their own pace and hope by March they're ready to go. Finally, what I would say with Oscar Tshiebwe, and I don't think this is going to happen, but I do think we have to live in the world of possibility that it's at least possible that if he doesn't get the NBA draft feedback, that most of us don't think he's a first-round pick, an elite NBA prospect. Could he come back to college and enter the transfer portal? I saw Jack Pilgrim from Kentucky Sports Radio. He does an incredible job on that beat, suggest this. And it's kind of a fascinating reality of where we are in college basketball right now, is that you have really good college players in the NIL world. And I think this is the important part. With the COVID extra year, I think the COVID extra year is throwing everything off for everybody, because you have these seniors, you have these 4th-year guys, in some cases 5th-year guys, that are basically like, you're building next year's roster assuming that they're gone. But the COVID waiver with NIL, you know what ends up happening at that point? A kid sits there and says, you know what? I'm making more money in college than I will as a professional. And so rather than risk it, I'm just going to come back to college. And it is throwing things off. And I'm not saying it's going to happen in Kentucky. And I'm not saying it's going to force Oscar Tshiebwe into the portal. But I think it's at least a possibility. And by the way, this isn't just a Kentucky thing. I'll give you an example. So I'm a UConn guy. And in a minute, we're going to talk about Donovan Clingan. We're going to talk about Jordan Hawkins. But what's interesting about UConn, their point guard this year, Tristan Newton, was a 4th-year player, a transfer from East Carolina. And I think the assumption was when they recruited him, he's basically a quote unquote one and done guy. He's going to come to UConn for 1 year. They need a point guard. He's going to ball out. Hopefully has a good year. Hopefully the team has success. And then he moves on because UConn has a 5-star McDonald's All-American named Stephon Castle coming in next year. Tristan Newton hands the baton to Stephon Castle. Everybody's happy. Well, now Tristan Newton just won a national championship. I don't know a dollar figure associated with what his NIL would be, but I imagine it'll be pretty good if he decided he wanted to use that extra year. But it's kind of like UConn built that contingency plan without him next year, but he could come back. And so I bring it up with Oscar Tshiebwe because this is a thing that is happening every year in college, every school in college basketball, where you're building a roster, assuming guys are leaving. And then the COVID year combined with NIL is making guys say, I can make more money here. Coach, you figure it out. I'm staying. Give me that check. And so with Oscar Tshiebwe, is it possible that the most money he could possibly make next year is in college? And is it possible that somebody makes him the quote unquote offer that he can't refuse that isn't Kentucky? Now, where it gets complicated with Oscar Tshiebwe, he is, of course, an international student. It limits what he can do from an NIL perspective in the United States. And I'm not going to get into the intricacies of it, but two things stand out. One, just because it's literally illegal for him to do certain things NIL-wise, he could literally, I'm not exaggerating, could get deported. It's not going to stop people from making certain promises or guarantees or whatever if he does decide to enter the portal. And two, there's always creative ways to get him that money, like Kentucky did this year legally when they were in the Bahamas, and they basically let him do all his NIL stuff while he was in the Bahamas. And so I just bring it up because while I don't think it's going to happen, I don't totally think it's out of the realm of possibility that Oscar Tshiebwe could return to college basketball next year for someone other than Kentucky. Now, I think Kentucky, obviously, from their perspective, they want him to move on, be a Kentucky legend, don't play in another uniform. Don't be Patrick Ewing playing in a Seattle Supersonics uniform. Don't be Akeem Olajuwon playing in a Toronto Raptors uniform. Leave college as a Kentucky Wildcat. But I think it's something to consider. But this is something to keep an eye on as Oscar Tshiebwe is in the NBA draft. But there's no guarantee that he stays. Could he come back to Kentucky? Could he come back somewhere else? Finally, two other interesting stay or go decisions. They both came from the national champion UConn Huskies. And I just want to hit on them quick because especially the go decision, I don't think was that shocking. The go decision came from Jordan Hawkins, who, I thought he was UConn's best player. I don't know. Listen, Adama Sanogo is probably UConn's best player. But in terms of, certainly the best NBA draft prospect, Jordan Hawkins balled out. Second leading scorer, 16 points per game, 39% three-point shooter. And what I can say is this is not surprising at all. I've been saying for a year he's an NBA player. I saw him like the first 2 times down. I remember seeing him before UConn went to the Battle for Atlantis last season. I said, whoo, that's an NBA player. For those of you who are old enough, he actually reminds me of Ray Allen when Ray Allen was at UConn. We only think of Ray Allen, the three-point shooter. Ray Allen was an elite athlete, an elite leaper, an elite player. Being around Jordan Hawkins this past week at the Final Four, kind of has the same mannerisms, the same body type, but Jordan Hawkins goes pro. He's going to be a top 15 pick, and this wasn't surprising. I think everybody around UConn kind of knew this is it. Take advantage of him. If he has the kind of season that we think he's capable of, he's going to the next level, and he should. Where it gets interesting, though, and we talked about this a little bit last week with UConn, is that they did get some good stay news from Donovan Clingan, their star freshman. And I think anybody who watched Donovan Clingan this year knows, anyone that watched UConn knows who Donovan Clingan is, but he's a Connecticut kid, freshman. Listen, he wasn't very highly rated coming out of high school because he decided to stay in Connecticut to play high school basketball. He didn't go to one of these Montverde IMG Academy type places. But the stats for Donovan Clingan were off the charts. 7 points per game, 6 rebounds per game. And how about this? 1.8 blocks per game in 13 minutes of play. So if you just double it to 26 minutes, not even 30 minutes, you're now talking about a 14-point-a-game score, 12 boards, 4 blocks, and that's only extrapolating it out to 26 minutes, let alone 40 minutes, where, I could find the plus, the per 40 minutes. I'm not going to bore you with, let's see if I can find it really quick, actually, because I'm kind of curious as I do this. But so Donovan Clingan at the UConn Victory Parade, National Championship Parade. Let's see. Here's Donovan Clingan's per 40 minutes stats. 21 points, 17 rebounds, 5.5 blocks per game. Those are his per 40 minutes, 21.1 points, 17.1 rebounds, and 5.5 blocks per game. And so I bring it up because this guy is a burgeoning star. Anywhere else, he probably, I don't want to say that. I was going to say he probably would have been a one and done, but he didn't come to UConn to be a one and done. He's a Connecticut kid. He's happy there. I think he wants to be developed. But I'll say this, depending on what Adama Sanogo ends up doing, he could end up being a breakout star in college basketball next year. But I don't even think I said it, but on Saturday at the UConn National Championship Parade in Hartford, he did announce, I'm coming back for another year. Let's run it back. Let's do it again. So from the UConn perspective, I'll say this. They still have roster stuff to figure out like everybody else. Andre Jackson, kind of their star veteran player, number 44 in your programs. He said all the right things at the parade, that he's going through the process. I give Dan Hurley credit. He kind of said all the right things, like Andre Jackson's done a lot of great stuff for this university. Our job is to make sure we're doing what's best for Andre Jackson, not what's best for UConn. So my guess is he goes through the draft process, might declare, it certainly will declare, but might come back because, elite athlete, but not a great shooter, still has some stuff to work on. The interesting one, though, is Adama Sanogo. From what I can tell with Adama Sanogo is pretty straightforward, is that he will, this is, if I have to give a prediction, he's going to declare, and it's a little bit like Oscar Tshiebwe. He'll declare, he'll leave his options open, and he will see, can I get drafted? How high will I be drafted? What kind of money can I get? And then from there, he's going to have a tough decision to make, because I don't know if he is a, kind of like Oscar Tshiebwe, a legitimate NBA player, first round pick type talent. And if that's the case, then does he come back for another year of college basketball? Now, two quick things. One, he might just decide to go out on a high note, right? Like, we won a national championship. I was tournament most outstanding player. There's nothing for me to come back for. The other thing is, again, the NIL component of it. Can he make more in college next year than in the pros? That's where it gets interesting. One, certainly coming back to UConn, a lot like Kentucky with Oscar Tshiebwe. They did all the right things. They handled it well. They made sure that everything was on the up and up because Adama Sanogo is an international student. But I can also say, you go on Twitter, there's some wild Adama Sanogo rumors coming around. And from what I understand, there are certain people that are letting it be known that if Adama Sanogo comes to their school, they can offer him some outrageous sums of money, and they'll figure out a way to do it there. I bring it all up to say, listen, this is what happens this time of year. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't think it's right, but it's the reality. My guess is that Adama Sanogo goes pro, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he comes back to UConn, but UConn getting the very good news on Saturday that Donovan Clingan will be back. By the way, I have a mailbag coming up later this week. If you have any questions about your roster, UConn, Kentucky, whatever, make sure to DM me, and I'll get you the best information that I can. With that said, I think it is time for me to get out of here. That is all for today's Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Listen, we're going to keep rolling with the portal stuff, all that. Plus, we're going to have some football stuff to talk about. Spring practices here. I know USC spring game is next week. We just had Auburn spring game. Ohio State's is next week. Colorado is coming up pretty quick. Oh, if you think I'm done talking Dion, you got another thing coming to you. So busy time, but a fun time. We'll start ramping back up towards football, but it is portal season, baby, and it is getting crazy. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. As I said, I think I'm going to do a mailbag later this week. So make sure that send in your questions, Aaron Torres podcast questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres podcast questions at gmail.com. And again, we're just going to keep rocking. We're just going to keep rolling. We're just going to keep portaling right until the portal is done. But that is all for today's show. I want to thank you guys and girls for listening, and it is time for me to get out of here. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back Wednesday. Also, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're probably just going to do daily Portal content. It's getting so crazy. I will be back on Wednesday. New episode, Aaron Torres Pod.